This is a lot, but it's important. We're tracking important developments in the Mueller investigation as criticism mounts over the new acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker's role in overseeing the special counsel. Earlier today, Roger Stone associate Jerome Corsi told NBC News, you don't hear this a lot, he expects to be indicted for perjury by Mueller. Corsi said Mueller's team delivered the news about a week ago. He told NBC News, quote, I don't recall ever meeting WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange or getting information from anyone about what he had, including the Podesta emails, Corsi said Monday. But they have all your emails and phone records. They're very good at the perjury trap. Corsi told viewers of his YouTube channel today he expects to be indicted.
But I'm going to be criminally charged. Now, the subpoena came to my home 3 days before my 72nd birthday. And this has been one of the most frightening experiences of my life.
Meanwhile, as some Democrats demand this acting AG recuse himself from the Russia investigation, just as Sessions did before him, a DOJ spokesperson released a statement today that read, quite surprisingly, quote, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker is fully committed to following all appropriate processes and procedures at DOJ, including consulting with senior ethics officials on his oversight responsibilities and matters that may warrant recusal. More on that in just a moment. Earlier today, former acting Solicitor General under President Obama, Neal Katyal, who helped draft the special counsel regulations, wrote in an op-ed, quote, no one, and I mean no one, ever thought the regulations we wrote would permit the president to install some staff member of his choice from the Justice Department to serve as acting attorney general and thereby oversee the special counsel. Well, with us to talk about all of it tonight, attorney Neal Katyal. He was formerly the government's top lawyer before the Supreme Court. He is now a professor of law at Georgetown University. Counselor, because your words, along with George Conway, drove the news cycle late in the week last week, it's so important to have you on, and thank you for coming on. If he approaches this process organically, if he honestly goes to the ethics officials, the kind of standing army inside the Justice Department, in your view, how can they not come back and say, you have to recuse because you've prejudged the Russia matter in the media?
Yeah, first of all, it's such a treat to be with you, Brian. And I think you're absolutely right that if they went to the ethics office and the ethics office applies the standards they always have applied, that you can't have a kind of deep personal relationship with the subject of an investigation or the matter, it's really hard, given all the things that Whitaker has said about this investigation, for him to continue. And there's a deeper problem, which is, it's not like Whitaker is, Oliver Wendell Holmes or Louis Brandeis or something, some brilliant person known for his judgment and his independence and picked for that reason. This guy is, from the bowels of the Justice Department, he is Trump's lackey. And, I think that's what makes this really stink to high heaven. And so there are constitutional problems, there's statutory problems, there's ethics problems, and you have to ask, why would Donald Trump and his Justice Department risk all of that? And there can only be one answer, and it's because they're afraid of Mueller.
Please tell the story about how last week you were arguing a case in federal court, and Sessions' name was part of the title of the case as Attorney General. By the time you got out of court, he was no longer the AG, and more importantly, make the tie between the fact that Whitaker's name now is, and yet because he was not Senate confirmed, this could technically, if you have a creative lawyer, affect some federal cases?
Yeah, I don't even need to be that creative. I think it's going to affect every federal case. So last week I was arguing the Sanctuary Cities challenge to President Trump, and the case is called City of Philadelphia versus Sessions, or that's what it was called when I walked in at 2 p.m. Attorney General Sessions resigned, in quotes, during the argument, and by the end of the argument, I don't think we really know what it's called. And I don't think it is called, City of Philadelphia versus Whitaker, because Whitaker happens to be a fake weak attorney general, and I expect litigants to start making those challenges as early as tomorrow morning. I think we're going to hear some pretty massive ones, and they will be coming and coming all throughout the next weeks and months, because this is an attorney general who does not have the power under our Constitution and laws to serve as attorney general for at all, and then specifically, he cannot serve with respect to Mueller for the reasons we've talked about.
So if you're telling me, if I represent a death row inmate who I feel has been unconstitutionally imprisoned, if I'm representing a client who's been nicked 3 times on narcotics charges, which I feel are unfair because of race or socioeconomics, and Sessions' name is in the title of that case, if I am crafty about it, I can say this attorney general doesn't have the proper standing?
You got it. Everyone's going to be coming into court making exactly those arguments, and not just in the criminal context, but in the civil context. The Justice Department is the nation's largest litigant in the federal courts by far. And, you know, there will be lots of people making these arguments. And, you know, no president has ever done anything like this with respect to an attorney general. It'd be one thing if it's an emergency situation or the like. This is something which Trump already has his own 2 guys in there, the deputy attorney general and the solicitor general. But importantly, both of those gentlemen were confirmed by the United States Senate. Matthew Whitaker has not, and our Constitution requires it.
What about this Corsi gentleman who says he doesn't recall meeting Assange? I think if you got buzzed upstairs in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, you'd remember that experience, seeing Assange, you know, 2D. And secondly, when he says, but they make a pretty good perjury trap, what happens when a lawyer like you hears an expression like perjury trap?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, it's pretty easy to avoid a perjury trap. You just have to tell the truth. Evidently, that's not what happened here, because, you know, of course, he said, you know, they got my emails and looked and realized I was lying. You know, and you know, if your story is, I can't remember meeting Julian Assange, that strikes me as not the best foot on which to stand. So yeah, and I think that underscores a fundamental thing about the Mueller investigation. It is bearing massive success. There have been so many indictments. The indictment and guilty plea of the president's national security advisor, his campaign chair, and the like. And that is why Trump is doing what he's doing, installing a lackey who is his loyalist to try and supervise and ultimately destroy the Mueller investigation.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.